After college, I had some freedom and I started to do my own social media thing. But then I kind of fell into the idea of, okay, you need to like get like a really good job and like go far with this. And so I started with a marketing agency and was like doing really well, working for Disney and Warner Brothers and all this stuff. But eventually that coupled with a relationship that wasn't going very well, there was just this moment breaking point where I was like, okay, something's off, like something is inherently off, even beyond the school thing. And I really need to look at myself and fix this, because I did have a programmed belief even from the beginning that it starts with me. And so I was like, I need to fix this. What do I do? And I happen to be in Los Angeles, which is the kingdom of New Age, the springing up of New Age philosophies. And my dad was like deep into it already, and my mom was, and I was kind of resistant to all of that at first. But because I was at this point, I was like, I need to find the origin of my challenges with relationship, with overworking, with this whole thing, and who am I? Just that question really came up. And then I started doing different kind of healing modalities and looking at like my own birth trauma and how that affected my relationships, my connection or disconnection from, my parents. And then it goes into, I didn't have too much childhood stuff, but just going into these nooks and crannies of, quote, trauma or disconnection, and really retrieving all the aspects of me, bringing it all to consciousness. And once I started going into those realms, I was like, whoa, this is very natural. Like, this feels quite good, and it made sense to me, and my extra senses started to turn on, and I was able to perceive the world like through the lens that I think I was always meant to. And so I did a bunch of different healing trainings, over several years, and really explored all these different kind of modalities and such. And it just kept on opening door after door after door, and I'm like, okay, where is this gonna lead? And it ended up leading to some pretty interesting places, as you know.
Yeah.
This is episode 16 of the Ownstream podcast, featuring Bridget Nielsen.
All right, welcome to the Ownstream podcast, episode 16. I'm Stephen Shelley.
And I'm Teresa Scoba.
And this week we bring to you an absolutely fascinating young woman, though probably wise and old in many ways beyond her years. Her name is Bridget Nielsen. She's based in Sedona, Arizona, if I'm not mistaken. And in thinking about how we found out about her originally, it was through a search, and I don't remember exactly what I was looking for. I was plucking around on YouTube or Google, and anyway, I saw something that looked interesting in the search results, and it was all about high vibration foods. And one thing that we're very aware of and interested in, and I guess we think about or we work on daily, is the general notion of raising your vibration. And we talk about that a lot in some of our articles. It's probably come up on prior conversations, most likely on the Ronnie Landis interview last week. But anyway, and so I was quite interested in that. And she has a huge diary on her blog about the importance of that, why it's so critical. And she has lots of recipes with gorgeous, wonderfully photographed food. And it's helped us a lot. This notion of high vibration food. So that's kind of how we got at least initially introduced to her, but there's so much more to Bridget than that. And Teresa, I think you want to talk about kind of some other things that have fascinated us about her that led to this interview request.
I do, though I want to mention the food first. This idea of raising your vibration, a lot of times people ask me, why are you vegan? Why are you plant-based? And is it health? Is it, how animals are treated? Is it the environment? And I kind of think this notion of high vibration food gets to all of that, which is that, I eat that way because I feel better when I do, because I think plants are vibrant, because it's good for the environment. So that contribution and humane way to treat animals, but meaning that it's, it's good for my body and it's good for the planet, and it's raising the vibration of my vibration and the collective vibration. So I think there's a lot of ways to look at that resonate with me. So we started to follow Bridget a bit, and she has a lot of videos on YouTube. She has her own channel on YouTube, right?
She has 2 channels. We'll link to those in the show notes.
And recently, so Steven's kind of been keeping up with her since that high vibration food information he found. And recently she had published some videos around getting out of the matrix. And this is something that Steven and I have been very interested in. We talk obviously in Ownstream and on the podcast about the mainstream path that's so well worn in our society. And we like to talk to people who have gotten off of that in various ways, and what that moment was, how they did it, what it's been like since. And she really, her series of videos on getting out of the matrix are really about helping people to see how they may have been programmed in society, how they, there's a lot of very loud messages that we accept as the truth. And we've talked about that before, and would do with Bridget about how that there's programming going on about, we hear a program and we believe it's the truth. And, we often don't recognize that. So her work has been about helping people see the programming in place and making decisions to step out of it. And she's been trying to help people do that through raising their vibrations and connecting to something greater.
Yeah, and so we talk about that quite a bit, because that's obviously where her work and our work intersect quite dynamically in forging your own path, finding your own path, your own stream, if you will. And some of that has to do with identifying where this programming is in place, and then maybe exploring a little deeper about, well, what do I really want? Anyway, so, this conversation is broad and sweeping. We cover a lot of things. She's quite interested in how the energy structure, the grid of the earth is organized, and how there are places like Sedona where there's a very special kind of energy in place. And if you've traveled to these places, you may have felt that. Sedona is one here in the U.S., as is Moab, and I believe Mount Shasta, at least in the continental United States. In Hawaii, there's some special things there. And this is not just in the U.S., this is all over the world, maybe even Angkor Wat. Or I don't know if you look this up online, you'll find 25 different maps that show different places, but I think Angkor Wat may be a point where those lines might intersect. Anyway, we talk a little bit about that, and how there is this interesting movement away from urban areas into not just high vibrational areas, but places where there is more nature, more wilderness, and more of a kind of more natural pattern in place. That's something she talks about in those videos.
Which is, totally in alignment with this idea of getting back connected to who you really are, and something beyond the mainstream.
And I think more to the end of the conversation, we get into really what I think people think of her work as being about, which is about exploring life beyond this planet, this density, if you will, elsewhere in the universe. I was looking at some Hubble Hubble, was it a satellite? It's not a satellite, but Hubble, the Hubble probe, let's call it, photos recently, and they're absolutely extraordinary. If you look at some of the photography taken via the Hubble camera, it's breathtaking. And it's impossible for me to imagine that there isn't highly intelligent and evolved life out there beyond what we see here day to day. And Bridget is quite interested in that. She's quite active in that. And I think if she were to describe her mission on Earth, is to be, so to speak, a bridge for content, information, teaching, support coming from other dimensions, other densities into ours, enabling evolution, growth, expansion, awareness, upliftment. And it's beautiful. So it's an amazing conversation, to be frank. She's really a remarkable person. You're going to get a lot out of this, I'm sure. Anything we should cover beforehand? Okay, so that's good enough. The conversation speaks for itself. We hope you enjoy it. We will be back afterwards to wrap up. Until then, definitely enjoy this great interview with Bridget Nielsen. Well, I suppose our first exposure to you, Bridget, was, I think it must have been an article, I think I found it, relating to high vibration foods that you had written for your website. And so I went there and was reading about that and was quite taken by the content, and then explored your website and thought, wow, this is incredible. And then I think that probably took me over to your YouTube channel, and I shared that video with Teresa, and we're both really interested in food. And so that was kind of our entry point into your fairly expansive world and the things that you are interested in and communicating about. So that was kind of our way of finding you, and so I guess by way of beginning, it would be interesting to hear you talk about, and I think we'll get into food for sure in down the road a bit, but to hear you sort of give a little sense of your background, and it sounds like around 2009 or so, some interesting things happened for you, but maybe talk a little bit about what your life was before a shift that took place for you, and then we can maybe get into what those changes were and then what's happened as a result of that.
Yeah, I love that. So for a bit of a backstory, I was raised in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I was, the kind of black sheep, even back then, because I was not Mormon in a very religious culture. And I was also raised vegetarian, which was also very different, especially in that culture in the early 90s. It was like I was coming to school with like a sprout avocado pita and everyone else had like their ham and cheese sandwiches, and so there were themes that began even from like early ages that kind of showed me my trajectory of being different and also a pioneer, and sculpted kind of my ability to expand the reaches of kind of societal ways of thinking into new things, and letting that be okay, even if that was kind of persona or ego shattering in the process as I've kept on expanding.
And so you went through kind of a traditional school structure, if I'm not mistaken, or I know you went to college and did a lot of traveling. What was that experience like, and how did that kind of help lead you to a point of transition or change? In particular, I'm interested in hearing about how school perhaps inspired a sense of contrast, or something maybe didn't feel right through that process, and then maybe how that began to lead you down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as many of us, and especially the kids of, all generations, there's very few kids that I think actually like the traditional school settings, even if they're very smart. I mean, there's even more enhanced ways of learning, but it was not the way that I was able to learn and receive information. And so I was a good kid, and I did what I was supposed to do, and I got the really good grades and went to the nice college and all of that stuff. But eventually, I think I was just at a breaking point by the time I went abroad, I guess that's sophomore year of college. I was done. It felt like I had kind of left the school structure and was out in the world. And my dad's like, okay, just finish these last 2 years. And I'm happy that he did, because it made me really never want to go back to it again.
Right.
Nice.
So I'm grateful for that. But it really just showed me that that's not who I am, and that structure and that way of being and the rules and kind of really the stigmas. I mean, even going, and I had a double major in art and business, and in art, it's like your art needs to look this way, and it's like, well, what? It's art. And now my dad laughs, because he's like, I bet if you went back to your college and said that you're making a full living partially off of painting alien children. They would never believe that, if I went back and spoke at my college and was like, anything's possible. It helped me. I've always been type that pressure and pushing my buttons has been a springboard of change and motivation for me. And I know for a lot of people, it's the opposite. So it's just kind of checking in to be like, okay, are you motivated by pressure, or are you motivated by like really like nurturing supportive environments? So it helped catapult me. So I'm grateful for that.
And I know, some people will feel like their experiences are not them, or it doesn't resonate, or like something's wrong, but they just keep pushing on, right? And can you talk a little bit about, like, you talk in your bio and in your videos a lot about programming and how we're programmed, Can you talk a little bit about that in general, and also your own experience with that and what it feels like? Like, what was that moment for you? And maybe you kind of knew all along. I don't know. You tell us. But that there was much more going on here. Like, what was that point of awakening for you?
There were points of awakening, like, all along the way. Like, even as a kid, I was like really liked the health thing, and I'm like, I'm meant to be healthy. Like, I was like 8 years old looking at like herbal teas and like wanting to be healthy. And then when I was 19 and I did a lot of like pretty extreme exercise, I got like a strong message being like, no, you need to go towards longevity and be really long-term about your decision making. So I've gotten kind of like hints along the way. But as far as the programming, it's one of those things that I think is totally crumbling for all people. Mm-hmm. And it's just from birth, before birth, like the programming starts. And you guys know that with a new little girl. It's all along the way. And I feel like because of the souls coming in right now are so special. I mean, all of us, even all generations alive right now, have a flicker of light in them of what they know, they're meant to be in this world. And that is in many ways, pretty much in all ways, counter to like what we're experiencing right now. So, it's just a matter of hearing that inner voice. And I think for me, it was once I really got out of the school system, because I then had spaciousness to feel my own energy and to feel myself, which it's not really, there's no room for that, in culture, mainstream culture a lot, because it's like, you're at this job, you have this family, you have these responsibilities, you just got out of school, and there's no breathing room, to let your soul really, for you to hear yourself. And I think that's kind of the biggest programming is the lack of time and space to feel ourselves.
Yeah, well, that's really true. And then any kind of support, there's very little support there for how to listen to that and how to kind of let that become guidance. And I'd love to hear, so people listening to this might be wondering, okay, who is this person? And, talk about drawing alien kids. And, what's so interesting about you, Bridget, is that we tend to talk to people in chunks of, like, we'll talk about their lifestyle and then the business and spirit, but yours is all kind of woven together in this interesting way. And I think that's something that we're seeing more of, and I think that will continue. I think that's going to actually just get bigger and bigger and bigger as people kind of emerge and begin to put their calling, if you will, or their voice in the world. But maybe talk a little bit about when you first, realized that there was more to this than what you had been told or shown. And then how did that become such a vibrant exercise for you? You coach people, you take people on these really extraordinary looking adventures. And you have a video channel that touches on a wide array of fascinating topics, all of which are really at the leading edge of, I think, where consciousness, or at least our understanding of it here on the planet, seems to be positioned. So maybe I'd love to hear about first steps into this kind of new path, and then if there were any moments where, like, some pretty significant resistance showed up, whether that was a relative saying, "What is this?" or, whatever that may have looked like, and then maybe how you navigated through those points.
Yeah. For me, it really, I mean, it's always been an inherent stream. So I know it's been there and it's been close to the surface. So it didn't take too much digging, but it really, after college, I had some freedom and I started to do my own social media thing. But then I kind of fell into the idea of, okay, you need to get a really good job and go far with this. And so I started with a marketing agency and was doing really well. And working for Disney and Warner Brothers and all this stuff. But eventually that coupled with a relationship that wasn't going very well, there was just this moment breaking point where I was like, okay, something's off. Something is inherently off, even beyond the school thing. And I really need to look at myself and fix this, because I did have a programmed belief even from the beginning that it starts with me. And so I was like, I need to fix this. What do I do? And I happen to be in Los Angeles, which is the kingdom of, New Age, the springing up of New Age philosophies. And my dad was deep into it already, and my mom was, and I was kind of resistant to all of that at first. But because I was at this point, I was like, I need to find the origin of my challenges with relationship, with overworking, with this whole thing, and who am I? Just that question really came up. And then I started doing different kind of healing modalities and looking at my own birth trauma and how that affected, my relationships, my connection or disconnection from, my parents. And then it goes into, I didn't have too much childhood stuff, but just going into these nooks and crannies of, quote, trauma or disconnection, and really retrieving all the aspects of me, bringing it all to consciousness. And once I started going into those realms, I was like, whoa, this is very natural. This feels quite good. And it made sense to me. And my extra senses started to turn on, and I was able to perceive the world through the lens that I think I was always meant to. And so I did a bunch of different healing trainings, over several years, and really explored all these different kind of modalities and such. And it just kept on opening door after door after door. And I'm like, okay, where is this going to lead? And it ended up leading to some pretty interesting places, as you know.
Yeah.
So I know you talk about your theme in your bio, the theme of your life. Can you talk a little bit about that and, what you see as your mission here and how that's guided your work?
Yeah. That's one of the things I'm a big advocate for, is finding your own personal theme, why you're here, your contract with this incarnation. And for me, I really I was named it, my name is Bridget, or Bridget ET, and I bridge other dimensions. I bridge, the new world to the present world. And I'm able to go back and forth amongst generations, amongst different dimensions, new ways of being. And once I kind of figured out that, which usually it's very obvious actually for most people, it's staring you in the face and you just can't quite see it. But once I really acknowledged that, that theme and started to see all of the rippling influences from other lives and the ways that I was able to express it, then it's one of those things that once you're conscious of anything, then it just becomes fuel and clear and a flowing river that just blends into these new ways of being. So that was great finding out that theme, so that I knew what direction to take.
And what was that? Was there anything in there that through that process of uncovering that stands out to you? One thing that I'm a big fan of, I guess, and it sounds like you are too, is of I call it your calling, but I think they're probably interchangeable in this sense. But was there is there any guidance you could give to people to try to listen to that, maybe identify it, and maybe give it the sunlight and the water that it might need to grow and flourish.
I love that analogy. Yes. The number one thing that seems to be the simplest first step is to go back to your childhood and see in its purity when you had that space before you got like put into all these structures and responsibilities, like who you were, like what you were interested in, what like sparked your imagination, and you playing all day, and how did you play, and how did you interact with kids, and really going back to that space is, I think, one of the easiest entry points to figure out actually how you can bring that into your present, and how that's actually one of your dominant ways of seeing your vocation and your mission in this life. It's very revealing. So that's my number one kind of tip to start.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess one thing I'd like to hear about is, so when you began to kind of pursue this theme for yourself, was there a moment or maybe an episode or some kind of a thing that happened where you made that first contact, where there was contact from some other entity, some other level, some other being, if you will, where you realized that you were having a shared moment with something that was perhaps different than, another person, if you will, sitting across the dinner table? I'm interested in that. I think that it's inevitable, I think, as you, I'm sure, agree, that seems to be accelerating those kinds of interactions. And we're seeing it, I think, largely due to the internet, at least as a vehicle for sharing and talking and revealing similar stories. But in your case, was there something like that occurred early on that oriented you in that direction?
Yeah, well, I actually don't think this is on any of my media, but the big kind of indicator of things beyond our five senses and beings beyond was actually when I was a little girl. I almost died on this hiking trail. We were like going down this kind of like cliffside, and because it was a shortcut and my family thought it was a good idea, and one thing led to another, and I was at the bottom and this huge boulder was coming straight for me, and my dad, my family, like everyone knew that it was like over. And in that moment, and we were in the middle of nowhere, like wilderness, and this guy out of nowhere came, and there's multiple versions of the story, where one is that the guy came and picked me up and got me out of the way of the rock. One was that the guy actually like shoved the boulder as it was coming. So there's a lot of different versions of the story, but the big thing is that by the time they got to the bottom of the hill, this guy was gone. And it was very clear at that time to everyone that was there that was something like, it was my guardian angel. And it was something supernatural, because there was no way they, with physics could even push it, or all the different versions. And so that was something that opened, I think, the door to me being open to then, in my early 20s, beginning to speak with like spirits and see that. But the big one was, connecting with extraterrestrials. And I had no clue that was how far it was going to go, and that I would have such deep, profound connection and communion, like with the stars. I had that when I was a kid. I had a very, very, very strong connection to the stars, but I didn't know that it actually would mean that I would start interacting with beings from other dimensions. Except my childhood self would have probably thought that was pretty cool. But as an adult, it was like, oh, really? Like, I thought ghosts were weird. And now I'm like, gonna like be talking about aliens like publicly.
So you talk a lot about ETs, obviously, as part of your mission and your theme and, part of your reality. Talk to us about, and maybe this has to do with programming for one, but why you think this is such a feared concept, and what people can do to open up more to this, to other beings, and if they're so inclined, invite that kind of contact into their lives.
Yeah. Well, for one, I mean, yeah, as far as programming goes, like, look at most of the movies and most of the media ever created about extraterrestrials, besides ET. Mm-hmm. ET is like the only one that's actually not like positive. So every input that we've ever gotten from, you know, beings coming on ships from the stars is that they're going to like completely destroy Earth and kill us. So I can see where it would, you know, be like a fear, and of course anything of the unknown is going to be scary. It's different, and especially something so foreign, so alien. So I get it, and I totally understand. And it's like, once we can move beyond that and be like, okay, that's not our story, you know, that's someone else's story, and we choose a new one, and we allow again the space for what it means to us. There's something deep within our souls that is conjured and begins to spring forth and bubble, and there's an inherent knowing that we are connected to more than just humans, and that we are connected to the greater cosmos and to beings beyond this world. And I think just from that higher space, allowing that energy, that's where, you know, beginning contact and connection and can occur. And that's the frequency you want to connect in with anyways. But it's just really like they're just waiting for the invitation and for us to be open. You know, that's how, in a way, non-invasive and compassionate they are for humanity, is that they can be that loving and strong for us to play out our own, you know, strange world, and they'll just lovingly be there, and they're just waiting to be welcomed. They're not coming in and trying to change things or force things or kill us or do weird things. They're actually advanced. Some of them are so advanced that they can really be space holders for our planet in the transformation right now.
Yeah, right now is a very special time. I'd love to hear you talk about kind of the shift that we're. I actually don't know if we're at the beginning, middle, or end of it, but that we're in. That's been happening for some time, and will probably continue for some time. But I'd love to hear your take on that, and how this broader understanding and awareness and connection that you have is part of that. Because I think in the Cliff Notes version, and I'll let you give the full answer, but is that the energy on the planet is evolving, it's changing. This has been forecast for, in some texts, thousands of years. So it shouldn't really surprise us that things might shift and change and open. And it sounds like, you know, you would have a very interesting take on that. What from your perspective is happening and evolving right now?
Ooh, there's a lot, but yeah, as much as I can say, our planet itself is going to the next octave of frequency, aka ascension. Mm-hmm. So the planet itself is a living entity that's doing that, that's upgrading. And thus, because we are the children of the planet, we are also like in our karmic path as these beings who've incarnated in so many different ways for so many different times. Like we have chosen to step into this in this particular lifetime, and where, you know, the planet's going through the actual cosmos right now, it's just a beautiful grand orchestration of waking up to the greater aspects of our human selves and being fully activated in that. And with that can look like a lot of different things. I mean, it's coming into full connection, full harmony with each other, into oneness, into like a global humanity that's aware and conscious of every action and every creation, and the harmony and synergy that we need for it to be sustainable and go to this next place of love and thriving the planet and the people. But the interesting part is, I guess, what you're getting at is the ET aspect, which is we've been, at least for a few thousand years under the impression, that we're the only ones. And so we're coming back into the remembrance. Part of this whole thing is remembering our infinite nature, all these different times and lives we've had, and remembering that we are connected to the stars, and like our ancestors and many civilizations have been in full contact. And so it's remembering that, and that's a part of it. And people, it's built in. It's like a timer system is in people's beings and souls and energetics, where I'm seeing it. It's like, it's so fun being in this position, because when I started talking about say hybrid children, which we'll probably get into, and just ETs, and when I started going really public with it around 2011, 2012, I mean, it was crickets, I mean, there's definitely pioneers that have opened that door far, but way before me in the 80s and 90s, and it was more, kind of abduction and grumbly and lots of different things. But at least from my perspective, I got to watch that how small of a populace was, interested and ready, even in 2012, which was a very powerful time. And now it's exponential. Now it's it's commonplace. Like this conversation right now, back then, just 5 years ago, would have been a little awkward. It would have been there's skepticism, in it. There's a little bit of craziness energy, just by the nature of where the collective was at that time. And now it's not strange, and everyone is talking about it, definitely in these awakening areas, but even in places that aren't, quote, awakened and are very mainstream, I'm getting calls and emails all the time, all around the world. So whether it's oh, that's not happening to everyone, it's there's stuff happening to most people. So
that's so interesting, exciting. So for people who might be hearing this for the first time, listening to this podcast, or not as familiar, can you talk a little bit about how some of the seemingly problematic or negative things happening on the planet right now are all part of this evolution, or related to this, like things people are worried about politically in the United States, or climate change, or those kind of things? Can you talk about how that's part of this process? Oh yeah.
I mean, the best kind of way of saying it, especially with you guys so into health, is it's a planetary and a collective human detox, and it's when you're toxic and there's things that are unconscious or pushed down and suppressed, etc. It festers, and it needs to come out. It needs to come out, and sometimes it's not pretty, the stuff that comes out of, say, our skin or whatever when we're personally detoxing. So in that case, now we're having a global detox, and so right now it looks insane. It's what? Yeah. Trump? What? Fukushima? It's just it just looks psycho and insane, and it is. And if anyone has ever cleansed, you become kind of insane, at times, because there's these, parasites coming up, or, addictions and cravings and all these sensations. And so, the biggest thing is that it's all, a part of the greater orchestration. And the biggest thing is to, instead of getting caught up in the crazy spiral, to ground as much as possible and go, okay, well, how can I, one, be the anchor in the storm of light, of clarity, of knowingness, of seeing the big picture and where we're going. So holding that energy, just holding the energy, is profound. And then going, okay, and what can I do? Because we each individually need to actively go towards, healing the planet, healing ourselves, bringing up these unconscious and subconscious aspects of us, and to disclose personally so that our governments can disclose, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot that can be done. And we each personally, really, we don't need to do anything, but it's more so we can choose to just spiral in the chaos, or be an anchor of real change and embodiment of this new energy coming in.
Well, and I'd love to hear. So I think we'll try to leave a little time at the very very end to talk about disclosure, but because that in and of itself is a deserves its own kind of soundbite, if you will. But I'd like to kind of just get into some of the food stuff as part of this equation, if you will, of what we can individually do. And you talk very clearly about a high vibration diet. And I'd love to hear you clarify kind of what that exactly means. What food does that include? What does that not include? And kind of tie that to this ascension, this individual process of ascension or evolution.
Yes. So I've been big on it kind of my whole life. It's been like part of what I knew that I needed to do. But I have to add in before I explain that actually some very like special like ETs and whatever level of acceptance you are of it at this point as you're listening. Actually, this guy Corey Good that is actually physically meeting with them. They told him to have me write the article. So the only reason I did, and I actually moved more in that direction, is because I was told that it was so necessary. And so I find that interesting as we go into the conversation, because like higher dimensional beings are like, your diet. And it's like, what? I would think, like meditation or, something would be like first. And they're like, no, the biggest thing you guys are missing right now is diet. And as you know, our bodies are so special, and they're meant to be clean, and they're meant to be vessels of light and inspiration that we're meant to bring through. And when they're clogged and cluttered, they can't be. They just can't be receptive antennas to what the frequency is going towards. It's just going to get messy, and everything's going to get amplified. And that's why we're seeing so much, like cancer and death happening right now, is because everything needs to be looked at. Everything needs to be cleaned up and brushed. So as far as what, generally speaking, and it's not to say that, one is, bad or good or whatnot, but as far as the planet right now and even our bodies, animal products are one of the biggest things killing our planet. Yeah. Like, cows. There's more cows than humans on Earth right now. And so the idea is the energy then that if that's destroying the Earth and then we're intaking that energy, then we're intaking destruction. So just kind of being aware of what the vibration is of what you're eating is. Did it destroy anything, or was it created from something positive? And it's a big transition, everything that we're doing, but the general idea is to become more plant-based, just more fruits and vegetables, letting go of things like gluten and of course, refined sugars and anything like that, and doing our best to move from animal products as quickly as possible so that our planet's healthier, our bodies are healthier, and we're more attuned to these frequencies, because the vibrations of our planet are really requiring us to be more plant-based, which will actually be a higher vibration for what's coming in and be able to assimilate it more easily.
Yeah, that really resonates with us. Can you walk us through kind of like a day in the life of food for you, like what that looks like and where you get it, where you source it, if that's relevant, but also what you eat in a typical day?
That's a great question. It's very seasonal. So I've learned that this whole, all of a sudden, hearing this right now and going, okay, well then I better go raw vegan or something. It's like, woo, there's a lot of education and attuning to where your body's at and that's needed. So my biggest thing is eating for the season. So if you ask me what I'm eating now versus what I'm eating in the middle of winter, it's going to be very different. But I go by, so for right now, let's say it's spring. It's warmer where I am in Sedona than other parts of the world and US right now. So I would wake up and I would probably not have solid food until, until maybe noon. And I'd probably have like a juice, like some kind of green juice, like something cleansing. And then I'd have like some kind of smoothie, like a berry smoothie, something just kind of like light and to get the system like flowing after fasting really through the night, where all the toxins have come up, and doing things that can clear those toxins like oil pulling and different detoxifying things. So I would go liquid. And then in the afternoon, I would probably, in the summer when it's really hot, I go liquid again, and do the opposite. But I would probably have like a nice, huge, big salad. And I'm really into like Manitoba grass seed that's like a rice, like it's like a wild rice, or having some quinoa, some kind of quasi grain, but not gluten, maybe midday into the evening. And then I love making raw, like sprouted seed sauces, like so different hummuses or different like kelp noodle pastas, things like that. So keeping it as raw as possible, but warming it if it's cold. So that would be my general like warm season food, but my winter food would look completely different than that. So,
hey, you guys have one of the best raw restaurants that we've ever been to in Sedona. What's it?
Chocolatry.
Chocolatry. Oh my goodness, that place is incredible. It's really, really, really good.
It's great. Yeah.
And so, kind of, I guess, making us. We have like 3 other topics we want to hit. And,
I have one quick question,
go ahead,
if I can, and then maybe we'll get into that. On the same theme of detoxification, we were just watching your recent video about the Matrix that you put on, and we were kind of like laughing because we both lived in New York City for so many years. You say something on that video like, well, New York City, obviously you have to get out, or something like that. And it made me laugh because we kind of both came to that point. But it took a long time, because we were really like pulled in for a long time. So anyway, just curious if you could touch on that a bit as far as the, detoxification process that is useful for an individual being, and then we'll move on to one of those other topics Stephen was talking about.
That's such a great point. Yeah, there's the detoxification, like it goes in all levels. So if you can just like think about it that way, it's like, okay, physical detox, like energetic detox, like cultural detox. There's really, we're needing to detox everything. And once we detox, then we can know what's real to us. And that's the thing, when people on the food thing say, well, I'm just going to eat what feels good to my body. And it's like, okay, yes, if you're fully detoxed. Otherwise, you've got parasites and addictions talking. So the same thing goes for instance, for like cities or culture or, programs of needing to have this job or this money. And they're just completely nooses, holding us into this lower frequency. And really it's about coming into our full empowerment and getting off of any necessity to do or be anything that anyone else says. And then at that place, when we can have that true freedom, then we can create and come from a place of true giving rather than this like fear of like, oh, I'm going to lose this job or do this thing. So, I talk about kind of like letting go of the matrix, as was in the movie. But even deeper layers of that, and that can be, being in certain like city, frequencies that kind of like trap you in energetically, and in your dream time and energetically and astrally, just really, really cleaning that out, like with the media that you intake, and just being really aware and just step by step, because just a step, like every week or every month towards one of these things, in a year, you're going to be a whole different person. So I'm not saying overnight to just like become this hermit that moves to a sacred site and like eats lettuce. It's like, no, there's definitely a transition, and transitioning in the right way is so, so important. I'm actually going to do a video on that for next week, because you have to fully transition that's authentic to your own ego structure, your own beliefs, to then when you leave, have it be a permanent change rather than just like, oh, this is what I think I need to do, but you didn't really finish it. So there's a lot to it, but just generally it's like, okay, there's a good amount to detox, and just one thing at a time.
Yeah, you know, we talk on our in our writing about not going back, you know, like kind of like what you were just saying made me think of what we talk about as a confirmation moment, where you don't go back to the way it was before, you know, and you hit that, you kind of cross that threshold where you're not going to go back there, you know, because I've left jobs before or made moves, and then like 3 years later I found myself in the exact same place I was before, you know, which I think some people can identify with, because that pull of the, you know, the conditioning is so strong. So I'm just curious if you have any other kind of tips for people about, you know, not going back.
Ooh, yeah. I would say it's self-awareness and like consciously identifying your patterns, because that happens. That will happen like again and again, whether it's like you're getting into kind of the same kind of relationship again, or the same job, or the same pattern. And it's like the quicker you can identify it, like the better off you are, because then you don't have to go through like another year of repeating it or something. So as I was transitioning, say, out of Los Angeles, I was like, okay, whoa, these are really like looking at my patterns and being aware of them, and consciously like seeing where they're coming from, and creating alternatives was a huge thing. And one of the good tips that my dad gave me, and particularly the relationship category, but I think it really goes for anything, is he's like, you want that thing? You know, like you want that, you know, mansion on the beach, or you want that like relationship or whatever it is, go deeper into it. So one of the things, because we can get a little caught with the whole new age movement and these different things where it's like, if that's not healthy, you know, I'm meant to be in a more positive relationship. And then you get out of that bad relationship, and then you know that you should be in a good relationship, but you're not quite ready for it, and you didn't, you know, fully play it out. So my advice from my dad was always go deeper into the job, you know, like take on more hours, you know, or like with this relationship, it's bad, stay in it longer, move in together, you know, like do all this stuff. So it kind of seems a little bit counterintuitive, but it just gets so sour, you know, in your mouth, and grotesque, because you get to see it and experience it so viscerally that then it can be that rock bottom that blasts you out. So that could be one way too. It's a bit more intense, but it kind of is a fast track. So
interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I want to change the topic just a bit here, because I want to hear you talk about one of the themes that you write a lot about. And it sounds like you lead people on experiential journeys that harness this idea of living your excitement. And this is something we're big fans of. We feel, as it sounds like you do too, that's not like a small thing. That's actually maybe the most important, maybe even the most spiritual thing or orientation you can have in the world. So maybe talk a little bit about what that means to you, how you do that, and then I want to ask you a follow-up about your adventures, and let's definitely cover that too, because they sound amazing.
Yeah, it's my of all these different topics we've been talking about, like it's my number one passion to see people align with like their natural self and like their true excitement and their true gift for like the world, the tribe, their community, like, and to see that connection between their gifts and like their natural abilities, and then that ability to then execute and like and ground and live that and embody that in the world. And that's the best. Like there's nothing better than that. And so we usually do them in Sedona, the ones that are about like particularly like living and finding your excitement. And we do them in Sedona. And for our adventures, the big thing is like, well, one, it was like, okay, what am I excited about? I'm like, well, I'm excited about being with other people, figuring out what they're excited about, and being in sacred sites, eating like high vibrational food, you know, really being in community together, just aligning, you know, the environment, like all the things we've been talking about. It's like the opposite. So it's, you know, the programmed matrix of this particular thing you need to do, blah, blah, blah. This is like the opposite. It's like you're in a free zone energetically, like where you are located, like say Sedona, for instance, the food is completely aligned, the energy, the people, so it's this grand orchestration. So what it's become, all the different adventures all around the world, is they're like mini experimental bubbles of what the possibility of this new frequency can be like with other people living in the world. And of course you're not like having a job as you're on the adventure or something, but it really does begin to like bring home this visceral experience of once, the world truly transitions, what it can be like. So it's a taste of that. And I think it's so important for people, because the biggest thing that I see is one of the obstacles is this isolation, which is an illusion because there's so many people awakening. But is that, they've never talked to, like I get calls so much. They're like, I've never told anyone that I am like awakening or that I believe these things. And I'm like, no one ever? Like, come on. And so there's something about this them finding tribe for us finding each other. And so that's one of the things we do, is we bring people together to experience that.
And these typically take place in really interesting places that I think have a special quality to them or energy about them. And maybe you could kind of describe what these adventures are like through I think you guys, were you just in Hawaii somewhere? And
mm-hmm.
Maybe talk about that one and what these adventures are like for the participants, what goes on and maybe where they, if there is a destination, where they kind of end up at the end of this.
Yeah. So the big first thing is location, because honestly, like location is a part of the ingredient list of teleportation. So like where you are physically located dictates your actual energetics. And so we always have them in like the highest places on earth that each have their own like particular nuances. And I love these particular places because they're so high. Like they just take you to that high place immediately. If you just sat there and did nothing, you'd get there. So just starting with that, and we do lots of different kinds of them, but the one that we just did, for instance, in Hawaii, was all about connecting with dolphins and whales. So we went out 3 times on the boat. So it's like we come together and we're changing this a little bit because it's challenging to do this, but we rented 2 big houses right next to each other. So everyone, you don't have to drive, nothing, and you're just together, immersed in this bubble. So there's no outside kind of like input for a whole week. And we went each morning. It's like the highest vibe, like from the farm, Hawaiian tropical food, raw breakfast. And then we'd go and be on the boat and swim with the dolphins and connect, telepathically. And then in the afternoon, we'd do, I would lead maybe like a watercolor, like art, creativity play shop. And then in the evening, we, all with these like high vibe meals. And then in the evening, we would do some kind of group activity or like some kind of dance or some kind of meditation. And then we'd go on, it would change, we'd go on like really amazing like hikes to sacred mountains, jump in waterfalls. So it's very like adventure and fun is like name of the game. I mean, as far as, we can, of course, the personal work and the meditation I'm like so big on, and the play and the fun is critical too. So it's really combining those 2 energies, and that's our big thing.
And when people leave this after they've had this experience with you, is there anything you recommend that they do when they go home? We're curious about how they could, as they re-enter, and also on the same note, and maybe different, but if there is any kind of practice you have every day in the morning or otherwise that you do to stay aligned and connected.
Yeah, the big thing is, of course, like you said, the integration, and it's such a dream. Like that's their experience. It's almost like a dream. And so my big thing is like, I'm big on like grounding into, and integrating. So one of the things that I have them do along the way is every day we paint a picture. So it's kind of like a postcard of the day, and they paint the picture of their day, of whatever the energy was, whatever they experienced, and then they actually write it on the back. And so the idea is when they get home to like take a few days off, an extra few days off of like work or whatnot, and to sit like with the pictures, and to also like have space to integrate so they can like bring it home and like remember, like that energy. So that's one of the exercises that I do to help them bring it home. And then we have a Facebook group that we keep up with each other so that, what we worked on is actually continued and executed, in the world. And as far as my like practice and some of the things that I do, one is just limiting distraction as much as possible, because it becomes, there's momentum that we build in any direction. And I feel like this time of communication and connectivity is incredible. But as much as we can connect in with ourselves and nature is like the number one. So there's certain like applications you can do to like block how much activity and time you're on like Facebook and social media and your phone and things like that. So I think just, cutting back on some of that time, that say hour a day that you're like scrolling through Facebook and setting that time to just be quiet with yourself and take a bath, or take a walk in nature. It doesn't have to be super formalized or anything, but just allotting that space and staying conscious of that space, because it's so easy and it's fun, and it's a brain rush to get like caught up in that. So that would be like the biggest one that's actually quite simple.
Yeah, and you keep using the word nature, and it seems like there's this, at least, it's happening for us and for many people that we're connected to, there's this call or pull towards nature, like really reassimilating with that, knowing, feeling, intuiting that our relationship to nature is not what it could be, and not maybe what it optimally would be. And I think that's, the massive influx of technology into our lives has set up, in a way, this kind of exciting contrast of like, wait a second, like I could literally stare at a screen all day if I don't check myself, you know. So it's a little scary. But I think that because of that, many people are taking kind of a hard turn away from that as much as they can. So what you're saying really makes a lot of sense.
It's a lot like what you were talking about going deep into something. It makes me think about living in New York all those years, like going deep into the deviation from your true self, or like, what's natural and right for you, so that you can be shocked toward your senses, basically, about it,
Yeah. And honestly, in a way, that's like, it's kind of not a better approach, but it's a very effective approach, because if it's like you're subtly, like it's like subtle and you're kind of like, you're in the suburbs, or you're not like really in the city, and you're kind of like on media, TV and computer, like, 3 hours a day after work. It's like, it's subtle and it doesn't seem like it's doing anything to you, but over time it is. So I like the immersion, whether it's immersion, in the deep depths of a city or job or relationship, or the immersion in, like, say, a sacred site, in meditation with like-minded people. Like, I think immersion is very helpful to really break from patterns and from conditioning.
Well, we should begin to wrap up. We have a sequence of 3 quick questions we always ask every guest at the end, and then we'll give you a chance to particularly tell people where to find you and what's coming up for you specifically. But before we do that, I'd like to kind of circle back and maybe kind of float out and take as much of a macro look at things as we can, because I think you have a unique perspective in that way. And so it seems to us and to many people that, as we talked about, this is a very vibrant, momentous time in our planet's history, and certainly in our civilization's history. And there seems to be some themes emerging, call them spiritual themes. And I'm curious what you would say, and as distilled away as you can, what the essence of this spiritual teaching that is emerging now consists of. And then I'll ask you a specific question about disclosure, unless that automatically leads you into that, which is fine as well.
So the question is just the spiritual teaching that's coming up right now.
Yeah, what is that in its essence? What are all of these new ideas seemingly pointing to for us as people now?
The word that comes to me is communion. You know, and it can be in that it's communion with everything, and it's communion with nothing. It's communion with yourself, and it's communion with all things. All, like everything is included. So that's what came up.
Interesting. A kind of a oneness thing, whereas we're all connected. Yeah. And then I know that we've hinted at disclosure. Why don't you just share a little bit, if you will, about the importance of that, what that entails, and what that might look like from our very limited perspective about what that might look like. But maybe give some meaning to that word. It's a way that you could look at disclosure would be really disclosing all the things that we haven't been ready to look at, which are our governments, particularly, and I guess corporations too, have hidden away because we weren't ready, and that's okay. And so it's really saying that we're ready, and what that means, what that's going to mean, and when those things rise to the surface, and are available, that will mean vast change and acceleration in crazy, like completely mind-blowing ways, like whether that's technological with like free energy and anti-gravity and freaking space travel and vast healing technologies and just complete paradigm shifts in the way that we perceive reality and time and space. It's going to be the big bubble burster, and that's why everything that we've been talking about today it's really about preparing ourselves for that, so that when that happens, it's gonna freaking blow people's minds, and it's gonna cause a bit of ruckus. But so as much as we can already do the preliminary work so that we can hold space and be ready to transition will be amazing. And so before we go into our 3 questions, I should just add to that. If you're listening to this and that sounds really far out, there's a program on Gaia that might be interesting, or not, honestly, but it's interesting to us. But it's called Cosmic Disclosure, which features, I think, I guess we could call him a friend of yours, Corey Good, talking about this in a very intimate way, experientially sharing stories about what this indeed looks like. And it certainly is, in the traditional sense, I guess it was an 80s phrase, far out, but I think, at a certain point, if you start looking at things with some measure of objectivity, you're led down roads that might have heretofore felt far out. And this one no longer feels that way to us, but I think maybe to some viewer or some listeners might experience that. And that show gives a context for that idea of disclosure in a very vibrant, clear, expository way. It's a TV show talking about that, and it's something that I think people could really wrap their heads around if that's of interest to them.
Mm-hmm. Well said.
So we'll dive into our last 3 questions. So the first of those is, what book or books, up to 3, would you recommend that every human being should read?
Oh, man. No pressure. Ooh. There's so many possibilities. I really think that I feel like the raw material. Do you guys know the raw material?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to say, okay, the raw material is 1, because it's going to, the idea if humanity needs, is changing, is that they need like a context or like an energy to shoot for. And so I think that that's like a really great frequency holder and concept holder for where we can aim. So I'm going to throw in that one, for sure. What are some other ones? it's so dependent on like kind of like male, female person. Because I don't want to make them all spiritual.
You can.
Man,
you can.
This was the toppy.
You can pick one for male, one for female, if that makes a difference.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm going to go with Graham Hancock's Fingerprint of the Gods, which just really like busts open, our true history and knowing like our true history on Earth, I think really is important, because then we can know who we are if we know where we come from. Right. So I'm going to throw in that one. And as far as a last one, just in theme of today, I'll go with the 4-hour work week.
Whoa, that is.
Didn't expect that one.
I know. I'm throwing this in because I think it's really important for people that are still, in 9-to-5 jobs and in the mainstream to start completely shattering those beliefs and programs. And it's not to say like I work a lot. So it's not to say that it's all about like not working, but I think just really blasting that open, because once that's blasted open, I think the mission and the purpose and like your spirituality will rise to the surface naturally. So that's why I threw that one in there instead of another spiritual one.
That's pretty uncanny, because that book, I mean, radically changed my life. Whenever it was, I read it the first time 12 years ago or more. And you're right. In fact, by giving me another means of making an income and more importantly, giving me something more meaningful and interesting to do with my time during the day, it did free up this kind of psychic energy, if you will, that has been very useful, not sitting behind a desk in a cubicle in a skyscraper in the middle of Manhattan, which is where I was before that. But that's a surprise I was not expecting. I wasn't expecting Tim Ferriss to make your list.
Well, it's one of those things. I can say Conversations with God. I can say like a million other spiritual books, and you can read them and you can have a profound experience. But then the next day you wake up and go to work.
Right.
And so it's like, oh, well, crap. And I think that that's like one of the biggest things holding people back right now. So I'm going to give it to him.
All right. That's good. That's good. Okay. The second question, again, this one is a little broad, but what's the best meal you've ever had?
Oh, gosh. The best meal I've ever had? Oh, wow. I'm total foodie. Again, this is challenging. Okay. Breathe. Okay. Okay, I'll just go with like we make this like vegan quasi raw like Mexican food at our house. And like we make like raw like chia tortillas and then we make like medicinal black beans with herbs and stuff, and then guacamole, pico de gallo, like the whole deal, and like I make like a raw like mole sauce. So and then my boyfriend makes a raw taco meat that's like ridiculous. So I'm going to say that. Like it always just comes back to Mexican food for me, and that's just like such a like, satisfying feast. So that's kind of, that's my favorite meal.
Is that recipe on your website, by the way?
The beans are. The taco meat I don't think is. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I'll work on that. I'm getting the other pieces up there.
Okay, so third question is, what have you learned in the last 30 days that you think every person should know?
Oh, 30 days. Gosh, like really, honestly, with the trip to Hawaii and being with the whales and the dolphins, it's like true knowingness. And that's not something I guess you can like learn. It's just something to open up to, is just that you are freaking infinite and you have the vast knowledge of the universe like inside you, and just that feeling and that coming from that place and living from that place. And I've really experienced that, and it's been growing in me the past 30 days. So if there's any way that people can tap into what I just said and grow that in themselves, that's where, all movement should come from in life.
Beautiful. Well, Bridget, before we let you go, tell listeners where they can connect with you online and maybe anything they should know about what's coming up for you, any trips, courses, appearances, etc., things like that.
Awesome. Let's see. My website, bridgetnielsen.com, which I'm sure you guys will have the link, I won't spell that. And then I have 2 YouTube channels. One is youtube.com/the Bridget Nielsen, and the other is youtube.com/the Hybrid Children, which is more extraterrestrial related. And as far as upcoming goodness, I've got 2 online courses coming in the next few months. One is about connecting with extraterrestrials and hybrid children, and the other is about healthy food, high vibe food. So 2 courses. And then I'm doing 2 speaking engagements that are conferences with Corey Good, the one we mentioned, one in Sedona in April, one in Spain in September. I'm doing a course or adventure on the East Coast, which is a first, and it might be a one and only, because it's a rarity for me to go out there. But in July, and it's more of an ET-oriented course in July, and then in September, I'll be in Europe and probably do like just a general fun spiritual adventure somewhere in Europe in September when I head over there. Where on the East Coast are you going to be? My friend lives in Pennsylvania, so it's in Pennsylvania. Got it. Yeah. Cool. And so it'll be there, and then we have our Sedona adventures in the spring and fall. The spring one's sold out right now, and then the fall one is in early October this year. Great. Well, Bridget, we can't thank you enough for your time and candor and grace in this conversation. Thank you so much for talking openly and in particular talking about things that people may be surprised to hear about, but talking about them in such a kind of light, wonderful way that I think makes it accessible. You're so welcome, and great questions and energy. Thanks, guys. We really enjoyed it. We really enjoyed it. It was a great conversation. Yay! Thank you, guys. All right, that's it for this week's Ownstream podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed our great interview with Bridget Nielsen. Be sure to check out the show notes for this episode for links to everything mentioned, including Bridget's website and her amazing YouTube channels, her social media channels, all the books she mentioned, plus anything else we discussed. All of that can be found at ownstream.co/Bridget. That's ownstream.co/BRIDGET. Before we let you go, also, please sign up for our weekly tip-off email at ownstream.co and just click the sign up button in the upper right-hand corner. This is where we share each Monday 3 cool things we've learned in the last week in the areas of lifestyle, business, and spirit. This could be an amazing quote, individual tip, or tool designed to bring you more freedom and power in your life. So definitely sign up for that again at ownstream.co and just click sign up. Finally, we've just started our Facebook page. Please like us at facebook.com/Ownstream and be the first to know about new podcast episodes, new blog content, and cool stuff related to our personal journey. Also, we're on Twitter at Ownstream and on Instagram where we post regularly at own_stream. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you next week. Thanks for listening to the Ownstream podcast. To learn more and connect with us, please visit ownstream.co or follow us on Twitter at Ownstream and Instagram at own_stream.